Buckle up for a rapid-fire deep dive into today's top climate and environmental news.
Sounds good.
We've got a lot to cover, from the still-burning landscapes of California to policy shakeups in Washington, and even a transatlantic weather report.
It certainly seems like a lot happening.
We're pulling from sources like the New York Times, NPR, and even some scientific journals to get the full picture.
Excellent sources.
Let's start in California, where those devastating wildfires are still raging. President Trump's visit to Los Angeles has really put California's water policy in the spotlight.
Yeah, his proposal to move water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta to farms and cities has definitely stirred up some controversy.
He says it could help prevent future fires, but critics are pointing to forest mismanagement and climate change as the root causes.
They have a point. The New York Times actually had an article detailing how inadequate hydrant systems made firefighting efforts much harder.
Right, and that's a problem.
It really highlights the need to look beyond these short-term fixes and consider the long-term consequences of these fires.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember the human impact of these fires. The LA Times shared the story of Danny Robinson from Altadena, who lost his home and his collection of vintage cars, including his dream Corvette.
That's heartbreaking. And for those returning to homes that survived, there's still a lot of danger. As NPR pointed out, unsafe water, lingering ash, and potential toxins pose ongoing risks.
True, and recovery from something like this takes a lot of time and resources.
It does. We need to be prepared for the long haul in this one. And adding to the complexity, we have advice from the former mayor of Paradise, California.
Yeah, the town hit by the Camp Fire in 2018.
He's urging Los Angeles to prioritize community spaces and open conversations about fire safety as they rebuild.
Interesting. What's he basing that on?
Well, he's emphasizing preparedness and community resilience, which makes sense coming from him. He saw firsthand the devastating impact of those fires.
Makes sense. Building back better takes planning and community involvement for sure.
It does.
Okay, shifting gears to Washington. President Trump has been busy signing executive orders and reversing a lot of Biden's environmental policies. This first week back in office has been a whirlwind.
It has. Those policy changes, particularly withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, expanding oil and gas drilling, and rolling back emissions standards, have sparked a lot of debate about the direction of U.S. environmental policy.
Not to mention the appointment of all those oil, gas, and chemical lobbyists to the EPA.
Right. The New York Times highlighted that, and it's definitely raising concerns about the agency's commitment to actually protecting the environment.
It's a pretty stark contrast to what's happening in the European Union.
Yeah.
They just reported a record-breaking year for clean energy use, with renewables accounting for 47% of their electricity.
That's huge. It really highlights this growing divide between the U.S. and Europe when it comes to climate action.
Inside Climate News also reported that environmental activists are preparing for legal battles to challenge some of these executive orders.
Makes sense. I guess we'll have to see how those play out, but it's clear that these policy changes are going to have a ripple effect.
Definitely impacting not just the U.S., but also global efforts to combat climate change.
Exactly, and it's not just the U.S. facing climate challenges either. Yale Climate Connections reported that 2024 was the second highest year on record for billion-dollar weather disasters.
Wow, how many were there?
A staggering 58 events worldwide.
And the trend doesn't seem to be slowing down. Arctic News is forecasting a huge heat flux entering the Arctic in early February, which could cause temperatures to spike over 30 degrees C above average.
That's alarming. Imagine what that'll do to the Arctic ecosystem.
It's worrying for sure. And speaking of extreme weather, Storm Ewan recently hit Ireland, bringing hurricane-level destruction.
Yeah, Yale Climate Connections covered that. It's a reminder that climate change is impacting the whole world in ways we don't always expect.
Now, amidst all this concerning news, there is some hope coming from scientific research. Science Daily published an article about the discovery of unique microbes in Amazonian peatlands.
Interesting. What's special about that?
They could play a crucial role in climate change, potentially helping to store carbon long-term or releasing it into the atmosphere.
It just goes to show how complex the carbon cycle is and how interconnected everything is.
It really does. And then there's this other research also from Science Daily on the complex reactions of CO2 in supercritical water.
What about it?
It could lead to new carbon sequestration technologies, offering potential solutions for capturing and storing those emissions.
That would be a major breakthrough.
It would, and in a stark contrast to that, we have Chevron expanding its massive Tengiz oil field in Kazakhstan. It's projected to produce 1 million barrels of oil per day.
Wow. That feels like a step in the wrong direction, considering the global push for clean energy.
It does. Before we wrap up this first segment, I want to highlight a thought-provoking opinion piece from Climate State.
What's it about?
It explores the geopolitical implications of a world grappling with rapid climate change, prompting us to consider how climate change might reshape global power dynamics.
That's a crucial question as we move forward. Understanding those shifts is going to be essential for navigating the complexities of a climate-altered future.
It is. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's so much more to explore. Stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into today's top climate and environmental news.
It's not just at the federal level either. There's a lot happening with climate action at the state level, too.
True. Inside Climate News reported on Vermont's Climate Superfund law facing its first legal challenge.
Interesting. Tell me more.
So this law holds polluters accountable for climate change costs,
Makes sense.
but it's being challenged by fossil fuel interests.
Of course they are. It's a landmark case, though.
It could have a huge impact on climate litigation across the country.
Definitely something to watch, then.
For sure. Meanwhile, in New York, their congestion pricing plan aimed at reducing traffic is facing criticism.
Oh, what's the issue?
The New York Times pointed out that it could actually worsen traffic in lower-income neighborhoods.
Oh, so it's raising concerns about equity?
Exactly. It shows how even well-intentioned policies can have unintended consequences.
True. We need to be mindful of that.
We do. And then there's Nevada, where the state's lithium reserves are attracting a lot of attention.
What's happening there?
The New York Times had an article about it. They're talking about the potential of those reserves for building a green energy future.
That sounds promising.
It does, but there are concerns about the impact of lithium mining on local communities and the environment.
Ah, so that's that classic dilemma.
It is the materials we need for clean energy often come with their own environmental and social costs.
It's tricky. We need to find ways to extract and process these resources responsibly, minimizing harm and ensuring the benefits are shared fairly.
Right. It's a reminder that this transition to a sustainable future is complicated.
Absolutely. There are no easy answers. It requires careful consideration, community engagement, and a willingness to address the trade-offs that come with it. And it's not just about policies and big decisions either. Individual actions play a huge role, too.
Absolutely. Climate Dog had an article emphasizing that they encourage readers to be proactive, get involved in their communities, and advocate for change, especially now.
It's a good message. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of climate change, but every individual can make a difference.
Exactly. And those individual actions can inspire others to make changes too.
A ripple effect.
Exactly. Now, we've been hearing a lot about electric vehicles,
We have.
but with President Trump's recent policy changes, Inside Climate News suggests they might become less affordable.
Well, that's not good. If we want more people to switch to electric vehicles, they need to be affordable.
Right. And it's not just about the cars themselves either.
What else?
We need investments in charging infrastructure, advancements in battery technology, and a shift towards renewable energy to make it all work.
It's a systemic shift, not just about individual consumers buying electric cars.
Exactly. And speaking of systemic shifts, we can't forget about the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA.
That was a big deal for climate action in the U.S.
It was, but Citizens Climate Lobby is reporting that it's now on the chopping block.
Seriously, that's a huge setback. The IRA included so many investments in clean energy, carbon capture, and climate resilience.
It did, and it's not just about losing those investments either.
What else is happening?
One of President Trump's first moves was to sign an executive order pausing IRA funding.
That's not a good sign. It really sends a message about the administration's priorities.
It does. It aligns with those other actions like withdrawing from the Paris Agreement and expanding oil and gas drilling.
And it's drawing criticism from international leaders and environmental groups, too.
It is highlighting the growing disconnect between the U.S. and the rest of the world on climate action.
A disconnect is putting it mildly. Speaking of international perspectives, The Guardian published an article about the Kyoto Climate Treaty.
That was a while ago.
It was, but it's still relevant. They acknowledged the treaty's successes, but also highlighted the challenges of global cooperation on climate action.
It's hard to get everyone on the same page.
It is, but it's essential. Global cooperation requires commitment, transparency, and a willingness to work together despite differences.
It's not easy.
It's not, but it's necessary. In the meantime, local actions can offer a sense of hope.
True. Inside Climate News shared a story about efforts to preserve Flag Mountain in Alabama. It's the southernmost peak of the Appalachian Mountains.
Nice. It's a good reminder that even small-scale conservation efforts are important.
They are. They contribute to a bigger movement towards conservation sustainability and community resilience.
Exactly, and they show the power of collective action.
Speaking of collective action, NPR published a heartwarming story about nursing home employees who rescued 45 patients from a wildfire in California.
Oh, wow. Tell me more.
They carried people through smoke and embers, risking their own lives to save others.
That's incredible. Talk about going above and beyond.
It is. It's a reminder that behind all the policy discussions and scientific data are real people whose lives are being affected by climate change.
It's a good point.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need those personal stories to really grasp the human cost of climate change.
We do. They ground us and remind us of the strength of the human spirit. So what about the scientific community? What are researchers doing to understand and address climate change?
Skeptical Science compiled a roundup of recent research.
What did they find?
Studies on ice cores in Antarctica, the impact of climate change on our sense of home, even how fossil fuel companies use social media to obstruct climate action.
Wow, so climate change research is really wide-ranging.
It is. It touches on every aspect of our lives, and it's not all bad news either.
What else is there?
There's a project called SCEHA on climate change.
What's that?
They're developing an interactive simulation game to help people explore possible climate futures.
That's a cool idea.
It is. It's a creative way to raise awareness and encourage people to think critically about climate change.
Definitely. And Science Daily also reported on research into the complex reactions of CO2 in supercritical water, which could lead to new carbon sequestration technologies.
That's encouraging. It's good to see scientists continuing to search for solutions even with all the political setbacks.
It is. Now let's go back to the political arena, specifically President Trump's first week back in office.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. The Columbia University Climate Law blog published an analysis of his executive orders and their potential impact.
What did they say?
They're concerned about the consequences of these policy shifts, particularly for vulnerable communities already feeling the effects of climate change.
That's worrying. There's definitely a sense of unease about what these changes mean for climate progress.
There is. The New York Times even reported that scientists are worried about political interference in government research.
Oh, no. That's concerning. It undermines public trust in science and makes it harder to address these challenges effectively.
And it's not just happening in the U.S. either.
Where else?
The Guardian reported that the Bank of England is urging the Labour Party to cut net zero mandates to boost economic growth.
Wow, so it's that same tension between economic priorities and environmental goals.
It is. It's a tough question. How do we balance economic growth with the urgency of climate action?
It's a debate that's happening all over the world. We need to find solutions that work for both the economy and the environment.
We do. We've covered a lot in this segment.
Yeah.
From state-level action to international agreements, from individual contributions to scientific breakthroughs, it's clear that the climate story is constantly evolving. As we wrap up today's deep dive into climate and environmental news, I think it's helpful to take a step back and consider the bigger picture.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. From wildfires and policy changes to scientific discoveries and economic debates, it's clear that climate change is impacting every aspect of our world.
Yale Climate Connections had a really interesting article highlighting the rising number of billion-dollar weather disasters worldwide.
Oh yeah, that's a worrying trend.
It is. These disasters are costing governments, businesses, and individuals a lot of money.
It's not just the financial cost either. The Arctic is also feeling the impact of climate change very directly.
Arctic News reported on that massive heat flux expected to hit the Arctic soon.
Right, potentially raising temperatures by over 30 degrees C above average.
That's a huge jump. It could have devastating effects on the whole Arctic ecosystem.
Accelerating ice melt, disrupting wildlife, and contributing to global sea level rise.
And speaking of global impacts, Storm Eowyn's recent destruction in Ireland is a stark reminder that climate change knows no boundaries.
True. These extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and intense, affecting communities all over the planet.
It really underscores the urgency of addressing climate change.
It does. Now, amidst all this concerning news, there's still some hope coming from the scientific community.
Oh yeah, what have they been up to?
Science Daily published some fascinating research on unique microbes found in Amazonian peatlands.
What's so special about them?
They could play a key role in mitigating climate change, either by storing carbon or releasing it into the atmosphere.
Wow, so these tiny organisms could have a big impact on the climate.
They could. And on a larger scale, Science Daily also reported on research into the complex reactions of CO2 in supercritical water.
What's the significance of that?
It could lead to the development of new carbon sequestration technologies.
That would be a game changer.
It would. We also came across a really cool project called SCRA.
What's that one about?
It's an interactive simulation game that allows players to explore different climate futures.
That's a creative approach to raising awareness.
It makes these complex issues more accessible and engaging.
And speaking of engagement, Climate Dog published an article emphasizing the importance of individual action in fighting climate change.
They make a good point. It's easy to feel helpless in the face of such a large-scale problem.
But even small actions can make a difference and inspire others to do the same.
So true. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts? Where do we go from here?
Well, it's been a roller coaster of information, hasn't it? We've seen the challenges, the setbacks, and the glimmers of hope.
We have. It's clear that the path forward is going to be complex and will require collaboration, innovation, and a shared commitment to creating a more sustainable world.
It's not just an environmental issue either. It's a societal one, interwoven with economics, politics, and social justice.
Absolutely. Addressing climate change demands a multifaceted approach involving governments, businesses, communities, and individuals all working together.
It's ultimately a story about people, about the choices we make, the actions we take, and the future we want to build.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the ever-evolving world of climate and environmental news.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back tomorrow with another installment exploring the latest developments and their implications for our planet. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.